Alright guys, TacticalRab here, and I hope you're all doing good and enjoying your day so far. 2 weeks today, the World Championship will be well underway in Dallas, and OpTic Texas are hoping this was going to be the one they're finally going to win. OpTic not in the Grand Finals of the World Championship since way back in 2017. This was meant to be the one, but after their recent performances, that seems rather less likely, although Dashy still does firmly believe if they play as a team and if they're confident in each other, the possibility is still there. Very much interested in your thoughts on whether they can actually do it in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Happy birthday to Shotzzy as well, 23 it seems yesterday. The Jordan year, you guys know how it goes. Obviously, there's been lots of talk about Shotzzy lately just because he's on this OpTic team. Have been questions, if they don't do so well, whether he stays there forever, what his future lies as. Because as far as I'm concerned, Dashy has some great loyalty to OpTic as an organisation. He ain't going anywhere unless he's forced out. And he was forced out a couple of years ago, but then he was, of course, back in. In Shotzzy's case, what does he value more? Like, he's won a fair few events in COD, but, you know, there's an argument that you're always looking at FaZe. If you're a player like Scrappy, if you're a player like Shotzzy, HyDra, whatever. Yes, FaZe are losing a lot of grand finals, and we're going to talk about that later on today. But I'm sure some of these players look at those teams and think, well, you know, maybe if I was there, they'd start winning the grand finals or whatever, because they're always there or thereabouts. And we think that FaZe Shotzzy was potentially going to be a thing before. There were rumours, at least, that if Scump hadn't, well, he decided to run it back, but he was going to retire after Vanguard. If he had have done, there was a very realistic possibility Shotzzy goes to FaZe then, and Simp becomes a flex. So there's just been some discussion on it. The reality is that OpTic, I think, will need to do well at this year's champs because, you know, for real, if they come top 8 at this year's World Championship, I don't think it's a guarantee that any of those guys are still on the organisation next year. Not like Shotzzy's going to get dropped because, you know, you're looking at Pred or maybe Kenny or even Dashy, like, who knows. Shotzzy is the safest player on the team in terms of who actually might get traded out if a situation was to occur. But the reality is that if someone might leave, Shotzzy would be the one to be concerned about. Just to quickly compare, right, because I think most people are probably putting the MVP race this year between Scrappy and Simp. I think HyDra certainly is in the mix as well. But his team, on average, probably hasn't been quite as good. They have only had one bad result. New York, they had that top 12 at the first major of the season. Apart from that, they've been pretty consistent. Of course, they won an event. HyDra's carrying the team as always, was the MVP by far the most recent one. So HyDra is in the convo and might well be in the convo just because of the role he plays and stuff like this. But if you look at the cards, I know the Lion Man cards aren't everything, but they are something in terms of the way the stats are calculated. This is probably your realistic battle for the MVP. I also don't think that they'll give it to someone back-to-back. I mean, they might, but I just think, like, the way that the CDL does it, I'm trying to think, all right, the way that they think, what will they do, rather than what the fans think. And I don't think they'll want to give it to HyDra back-to-back. They may, and Simp also has won an MVP before, way back in the Cold War season, right? Even though I don't know if it was officially given out back then. So, even though he was kind of unanimously considered MVP, I don't know if it was necessarily handed out. So anyway, we'll see what the CDL decide to come up with, but it's probably between these two guys, Scrappy and Simp. I think the reality is, though, especially given the most recent performance from Simp at the Major, and yes, Scrappy was 99 overall, but so was Simp at the most recent tournament, and they made the finals, and Simp played lights out in the finals and in the entire tournament, but, you know, his team just let him down, or whatever you want to say. Like, Simp's been unreal. I think I would lean Simp's way, just partially because Scrappy just got bopped out top 4 again and got slammed by the Subliners. Genuinely, that one series where Toronto got embarrassed on that championship Sunday at Burbank, I think that may have turned the tides against Scrappy for the MVP race this year. But intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Few other lineman cards to go through. These are the Los Angeles Guerrillas guys, and they were, I mean, it's a remarkable run from these boys, really. To even make it to the World Championship in the first place, Estriel and Flames, that duo that were dominating the Black Ops 4 scene, like the throwback scene effectively a couple of years ago, they came to play here. Estriel, likely Rookie of the Year at this point. Sure, the numbers don't look spectacular, but I feel like the eye test on Estriel is better than the numbers suggest, which is, I think, one of the reasons why the lineman cards don't always, of course, tell the entire picture. Fame, though, is pretty damn good this stage. Definitely in Search and Destroy, he stepped up big time. Of course, he had that famous 1 versus 4 last weekend, although they still lost the map. So, yeah, their Search and their Harp, one of their control was was all slightly negative, but only just negative. And to be fair, they got to Championship Sunday, they came top 3, and they got, slapped around, let's be honest, by 2 teams they should have been losing to. But even both of those series weren't absolutely embarrassing. So, they definitely held their own, and they'll play OpTic round 1 of the World Championship, which of all the games to play is a pretty good one, because they've got some teamwork. I know there's been some questions like, of these 4 guys, who's going to be in the league still next season? Is there going to be, who's their best player as well? It's an actual difficult question to answer. I think there's a good argument that Estriel may be their best player. You can probably argue DiamondCon. Recently, you can maybe argue Fame, and Flames has been pretty good, especially when he first came in, he was really good. So it's just a fun team to watch, Gorillas, and I mentioned a while ago that they're an easy team to root for. They've not got beef with anyone. They keep after themselves generally, and they're just trying to work on improving and being the best versions of themselves. And guess what? It's worked out, and they've made champs over many other teams they would have been favoured to fall behind. These were the FaZe cards, by the way, so yeah, kind of a no-brainer at this stage. Simp at a 99 overall. Cellium actually had the highest ARKD in Search and Destroy with a 1.37. Great kills per round, great first bloods, but his stats in the other modes weren't quite as strong, maybe as you'd usually expect, but 1.06 in hardpoint per cell isn't what you might usually see. And I do think that there's a good argument to say that this year on the whole, Drazah has been a better player than Cellium. I think you can definitely make the case for that. Maybe if you consider the first couple of stages, then you probably would argue the other way. But in recent times, I do think Drazah's probably been better than Cellium, and there's always an argument in COD about recency bias, how important is it? But the reality is that recency is actually quite an important thing. What happens at Champs is, more important than what happens at Major 1. So, on the course of the season, it's difficult to say, but certainly Simp has been their best player as of late. Purple in a number of categories, 1.3 in Search and Destroy in his own right, 99 overall, so much damage, so much impact. But second place, right, and of course we're going to talk about that later on today. These were the Champions cards. The New York Subliners get the victory. HyDra purple in hardpoint especially. Again, in Search and Destroy, his first blood rate is really good, and this is the thing with HyDra that I don't exactly think people overlook, because they know this to be true, I think, at this point, but his engagement rate is just so high for a player that also slays really hard. There's no other player really, apart from, legitimately Scump in his prime, who would be able, and even Simp to some degree, but even Simp on some level doesn't play at quite the same pace that HyDra does. HyDra has basically the highest damage and engagement in the entire league, and yet he has one of the highest KDs in the entire league. It's so unprecedented, and you see it in Search as well. The fact that he has the best first blood rate in the league for his role, and he's not even really considered the entry sub, right? He has more first bloods than Kismet does, although people would say, well, HyDra's the slayer, Kismet's the whatever, right? The objective man or the entry man or whatever. It's not really how it works. HyDra is the do-it-all, effectively. Not like Kismet was bad. Kismet was really good this stage, as you can see a big important bounce back from him, but it was their respawns, especially the hardpoints, that got the job done for them this stage, but their Search and Destroy was good enough to get them over the line. So one of the big questions, of course, was about these cards. People were talking about Skyz as well. I guess we should mention that real quick, just because it's not like Skyz's numbers were good, but this is one of the reasons why the lineman cards don't tell the entire story, right? Because they won the event. Sure, Skyz had 73, and had, let's say, Subliners lost this event, come in second place or something, people would have been like, damn, the Skyz guy's terrible, right? Because his numbers are bad. But, because they won, this is why you see it a different way. Skyz has, I think maybe he's won 7 events now, certainly, okay, you can kind of include the online cheese qualifier, home series, whatever they were called, back in MW19 or Florida Mutineers. But every final Skyz has been in for the last few years, he's won. And obviously, if your teammates are doing this, if you look at Kismet, he's getting some decent hill time, and HyDra is just killing everything on the map, as is Sib, and Kismet turns up. There's only so many kills to go around if you're Skyz. So if you're Skyz and you're just sitting in the hill for 81 seconds per 10 minutes, more than anyone on the team, you're doing the job you need to be doing. But still, in Search and Destroy, for example, they could need a bit more production out of Skyz, because they might need their Search and Destroy to be a little more consistent when they get to Champs and they play the real top teams, because, you're going to need to win 5-map series, you're going to need to win 7-map series potentially if you want to win the World Championship. But let's talk about this OpTic Texas team, because we've mentioned the top 3, OpTic not included, of course, because they did not make it in the end. Their cards, well, we saw them the other day. I'm not going to go through it again because not especially pretty. But Dashy was talking to Scump a while ago, right? So not exactly sure when they recorded these. During the Major 4 qualifiers somewhere, they did Pred, they did Shotzzy, and there's the Dashy one. I imagine maybe there's a Kenny one coming soon, where Scump sat down with all the guys and talked through their career, their history on OpTic, the storylines of the last few years. They actually addressed with Dashy what the kind of criticism that Shotzzy and Scump had leveled at Dashy for the time they were teaming together. They kind of addressed that and talked about how Dashy had evolved and moved on. But just a couple of interesting things I wanted to mention. Certainly what he said towards the ends on just the potential of this OpTic team, because this is coming during the Major 4 qualifiers when they've obviously on some level fallen off. Like, I think when they're recording this, they probably know they're not playing quite the same COD they were back at Major 3. But at the time, there was probably a feeling that, okay, they're going to turn this around relatively easily over the coming qualifiers. That, of course, never happens. They lost all the qualifiers in a row. But it's not like Dashy is wrong, because as he full well knows, and as the team should know as well, when they're playing at their top level, they can be winning events comfortably, as they did on the Championship Sunday in Toronto. But replicating that is the tall order, and Dashy especially talks about confidence in the team, and that is something which arguably is somewhat lacking right now.
Like, at the beginning, he was like, you know, setting all the plays and like 3-1ing and doing all the nerd shit, and I'm like, damn, get shit in there. And then fortunately got hurt. It is what it is. But I remember just like thinking like, damn, we might not lose with this team. Like, because we were so complete. Our S&D is probably the most important game mode to be good at. And we had not only 4 individually really good search players, but we also worked well as a team, and we were also icy as fuck.
And to control, we were like 20-1.
Oh my God, we were on like 13 in a row.
Yeah, we were insane at control.
We were insane. We were insane for sure.
Man, that shit pisses me. I hate thinking about it, because that
I know.
That trajectory, like, I mean, that was the end of my career. That was like the end for me, and I was like, just thinking about it.
It should have played
just
different.
a shit way to end in my mind.
Especially with how we started the year, it was kind of like almost a tease on the way, but
yeah,
it is what it is.
Yeah. What would it mean to you if you bring home champs? It'd be the first since the Dynasty roster. I mean, second ring ever for OpTic. What would it mean to you to bring it home?
I mean, everything. It's pretty much what I live for, what I grind for, what I look forward to doing every single day is potentially one day hoisting up that trophy alongside my teammates, for the fans, for the org. There wouldn't be, honestly, more gratifying feeling. So,
and you deserve it. I mean, you've been one of the best players really since you've entered the league. Like, it's due.
Appreciate it, but it's just one of those things that I know, one, how hard it is, because there's so many great teams and so many great players, but I just know that if we just play our game, we're just confident in each other, leave it all out there.
That's all you can ask for.
Absolutely.
I asked Ant this question as well, and he kind of responded to how I think about champs. But do you put it on a pedestal, or do you kind of just think of it as just another tournament? Obviously, with more intensity, more practice goes into it. But do you put it on that pedestal, or do you kind of just go into it level-minded?
I do, actually, just because, I don't know, there's like almost a different aura about it. It's the most prestigious event of the year. There's a different trophy for it. Obviously, you get a ring, which is probably the biggest reason why it's more unique than the other tournaments, but the money's different too.
That's what Ant said. Ant said it was all about the money.
So this is why there's been some debate on what Kenny has had to say, right? The tweets that Kenny has done, talking essentially about Pred. We don't really know exactly what the storyline is there, but just based on clips we've seen on the process over the last, basically this entire season, there's been a couple of moments where Kenny and Pred get into a little bit, and, in my opinion, if there's any two players right now that aren't seeing eye to eye, it might potentially be those two, and confidence in the team, all these other factors. But look, are OpTic going to be able to turn this around? It would be an incredible turnaround if they were to win champs. It's actually, I would say, really unlikely, just based on the history, and for them to actually go and win the World Championship. But we'll just look at the season, right? So these are their records the entire season. They started off a little bit touch and go, like they lost that first series to the Subliners. I think there was like a terminal search and destroy in there. Then they bounced back. They beat Rockers, Surge, Ravens, Legion, lost to Miami, of course, which set them up for all the Miami storylines to come with the Pred 3-0 sign and all this stuff. stuff that we've seen from then to the end of the season. Then all these losses to FaZe. During Major 1, they lost in the losers finals to bow out of the tournament top 3 in the ends. Then they won loads of series in a row through to Major 2. Then they lost again to FaZe twice to eventually fall in the grand finals. And that was the story of the start of the season. And the second half of the season, they was looking really good. Again, they lost to FaZe in the first round of the qualifiers for Major 3. Then they won 6 straight, went to the first round, won that, lost to Toronto, and then made the losers run all the way through Miami at Subliners, FaZe in the ends, and then beat Toronto in the grand finals. It's got to be said, though, many people mentioned at the time, during this run, it's not like they were a dominant force, right? Like, let's not forget, going into that championship Sunday in Toronto, very few people actually had them winning the tournament because at that point they were not playing the best stuff. Like, their win against Ravens was reasonably acceptable, but it wasn't massively impressive. They then lost to Toronto. They then scraped by Miami to make it to the Sunday. So there was a feeling that, well, are OpTic really going to win this one? Not many people had them winning it. And then they come out with one of the greatest championship Sunday performances ever and get past Subliners and FaZe in Game 5, so some big clutches, certainly from Dashy, and then just smoke Toronto in the finals. So, you know, that one day, the 19th of May, was a massive day for OpTic. But even in the weeks leading up to that, right, I mean, they beat Boston Online in 5, they beat Gorillas in 4, Thieves in 4, Miami in 4. Like, you know, it wasn't exactly a dominant performance leading up, right? So I think it's easy to forget a little bit that the only time that they've really shown absolute dominance this year was on that one singular day. And sure, can you get lightning in the bottle the second time? Maybe. But unfortunately for OpTic, they haven't been able to recapture that yet. And obviously lots of Game 5 losses over the last couple of weeks. But, you know, then they lose to Miami again in a Game 5 in the first round. So if their search and destroy improves, they obviously can win the tournament. But the difficulty is they're going to scrim, they're going to practice. I'm sure they're going to get better. But are they going to get better enough, I guess, is the question, right? Because Gorillas is not an easy first round game, and every team right now is going to be going really hard going into the World Championship, and OpTic are starting from a point somewhat behind where these other teams have been over the last couple of weeks. But very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.